What if the first message from another world didn't come from the stars, but from beneath our own feet? What if the silence of Antarctica wasn't silence at all? January 1983. Lake Argus Research Facility. 12 Americans trapped in endless winter, 3,000 miles from the nearest city. Outside, a white desert that eats sound. Inside, metal corridors that hum like nerves under strain. Jack Marlowe, the night radio operator, was used to the static. The hiss of deep space, the echo of satellites, the distant crackle of weather reports from McMurdo. But that night, something different slipped through the noise. 3 short bursts. Too long. Pause. Then again. It wasn't Morse code. The rhythm inverted itself, as if time between the beats had meaning of its own. Jack adjusted the dials, checked the antenna, the ground lines, everything normal. Yet the sound persisted, rising from nowhere. Or maybe from below. He called for Dr. Alan Pierce, the mission chief. Pierce appeared in a half-zipped parka, face unshaven, eyes alert. They listened together, heads bent toward the speaker. Could be solar interference, Pierce said. Jack shook his head. No storms, no solar wind, and the signal isn't coming from the sky. Then where? Jack pointed at the floor. Down. Pierce said nothing. The wind outside battered the metal walls, but the pattern kept repeating, clean and deliberate. He ordered a systems check at dawn, then went to wake the geology team. In the lab, biologist Nora West studied a thin slice of deep ice under the microscope. Tiny air bubbles inside the frozen sheet flickered faint blue when the fluorescent light hit them. She thought it was reflection until they pulsed again. Synchronized like breathing. The drill rumbled in the distance, digging deeper into the glacier. They were close now, less than 200 feet from the buried lake that had been sealed for millions of years. Everyone on base felt it. The strange pressure in the air, like waiting for something to answer. At 1:13 a.m., the lights flickered. A single heartbeat of darkness. The heater coughed, came back. Jack's coffee rippled in a perfect circle on the desk. Then the signal returned, louder than before, crawling up through the static like a whisper through teeth. Pierce ran back into the radio room. Source. Jack switched channels, cut the surface antenna, and routed to the borehole line that monitored drill vibration. The needle spiked and stayed pinned. It's not coming from the atmosphere, he said quietly. It's coming from the shaft. For a long moment, no one spoke. The entire station seemed to listen with them. The steel groaned. The paper recorder scratched out another sequence, 3 short, 2 long, pause, and then a low tone that wasn't a sound so much as a pulse felt in the chest. Nora arrived, pale from the cold, carrying her slide. The ice samples are changing, she said. They're active. Jack looked up. They're not the only ones. The lights dimmed again, this time staying low. The signal rose into a thin metallic cry that made the coffee cups tremble on the table. Pierce leaned closer to the recorder, jaw set. What does it say? Nora asked. Jack didn't answer. He opened the station log, his hand unsteady, and wrote, Something down there is calling. Morning came without sunlight, just a dim gray shift that meant the storm had changed direction. The world outside the station was still a white void, but inside Lake Argus something had begun to move. Geologist George Hayes leaned over the core table, breath misting above the newly drilled samples. The ice had come from a depth where no light had existed for millions of years. Yet inside one of the cores, small bubbles flickered faint blue like distant stars. He frowned, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The glow was still there. Pierce, you better see this. Dr. Alan Pierce joined him, his parka half-buttoned, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand. When he looked down, the glow seemed to pulse faster, as if sensing his presence. "Refraction from the lab lights?" he asked. "Not possible," Hayes said. "The glow's inside the bubble. It reacts when I move." Pierce turned to the intercom. "Nora, bring your microscope." Minutes later, Dr. Nora West arrived, her hair still damp from the shower, face pale in the fluorescence. She carefully sliced a piece from the core and slid it under the scope. The lens adjusted, light sharpening. Her breath caught. "George, these aren't air bubbles," she said softly. "They have structure, membranes, but they're not organic, not in any way we know." Pierce leaned over her shoulder. On the monitor, the microbubbles looked like tiny circuits, hexagonal cells laced with glowing filaments that blinked in rhythm, forming patterns too precise to be random. "Cells that think like machines," Nora whispered. The temperature gauge on the wall flicked down, then up, then down again. The air turned brittle, a fine frost creeping along the edges of the microscope tray. Jack Marlowe entered the lab, clutching his recorder. "Before you say anything, it's not the equipment," he said. "The signal's back. Stronger." Pierce didn't look up. "Same pattern." Jack hesitated. "Not exactly." He played the tape. Static first, then the familiar 3 short and 2 long bursts. But between them now, faint and warped, something else swam through the noise, vowels, drawn out and wet, as if spoken from underwater. Pierce frowned. "Enhance it." Jack twisted the knobs, bringing the sound forward. The lab filled with a low, humming voice. It didn't belong to any language, but every word had weight, each syllable echoing in the chest instead of the ears. Nora felt it in her bones. Her hand trembled on the microscope focus wheel. The blue bubbles inside the ice brightened with each pulse from the speaker, glowing in time with the sound. George stepped back. "It's reacting. The sample's reacting to the signal." Pierce shut off the recorder. The room went silent except for the low creak of the steel walls. "That's enough for now," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. They stood in uneasy quiet. Frost coated the inner windows, though the heaters ran at full power. The temperature monitor jumped again, 4 degrees lower in seconds. "Systems malfunction?" Nora asked. Pierce shook his head. "Not unless the malfunction knows when we're watching it." By evening, the lab lights began to dim on their own. Tools left on the counter slid a fraction of an inch as if the floor shifted. George reported the drill sensors picking up faint vibrations from below the borehole, steady and rhythmic, like a pulse. At 23:47, the signal returned. Jack was alone in the radio room this time. The paper spool turned slowly, printing the same repeating pattern, only now it came with an undertone. A voice too clear to dismiss as noise. He listened, leaning close to the speaker. The sound was low, fluid, broken by bubbles of static. Then words surfaced through the distortion, syllables rising like something gasping from beneath ice. "Let us see the light." Jack froze, his breath misting before him. The room was completely still except for the steady hum of the heater. He hit record, hand trembling. Outside, the wind screamed across the Antarctic plain, but beneath the howl, another tone lingered, deep, electric, alive. When Jack played the tape back, the words repeated once more, softer now, as if whispered from the frozen earth itself. "Let us see the light." He stared at the recorder for a long time before writing a single line in the logbook. "The voice knows we're listening." The first real crack in the team didn't come from the ice. Came from the sound. 2 days after the blue light incident, the lab's temperature controls failed again. This time the readings didn't drop, they climbed. The sealed ice cores, stored in a freezer that should have stayed at -40, registered a slow rise to -22. When Nora checked them, Thin threads of condensation crawled across the transparent walls of the containers. Inside, the bubbles were pulsing soft, blue, deliberate. "They're generating heat," she whispered. "From where?" George Hayes frowned, tapping the glass. The temperature jumped another degree. "They're reacting to contact," he said. "Like they know." Pierce ordered the lab sealed. No one touched the cores without gloves, no one worked alone. But it was too late for calm. That night, one of the drill technicians, Mason Cole, claimed he heard something outside while on generator watch. "Not the wind," he told Jack. "It was under the tower, like someone was knocking." Jack followed him out into the blizzard. The aurora flickered above, casting green veins over the white waste. When the wind died for a heartbeat, they both heard it. A slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump rising through the frozen steel legs of the drill. "Could be thermal stress," Jack offered. Mason shook his head. "Stress doesn't knock back." By morning, half the crew wanted the operation suspended. Nora argued the samples could represent an entirely new branch of life, or not life at all, but something older. Pierce countered that nothing justified losing control of the site. The argument turned into shouting. The walls seemed to hum in sympathy, as if the metal itself was listening. Later, when silence finally returned, Jack sat alone in the radio room, replaying the latest transmission. The signal had changed again. Same rhythm, but shorter pauses, sharper tones, almost intentional. He leaned closer to the paper spool, reading the new pattern as it printed. The spacing was no longer random. It mirrored his own last transmission to McMurdo. Dot for dot, pause for pause. He wrote in the logbook, pressing hard enough to tear the page. "It's trying to mimic our code, like it's learning." Then he stopped, listening to the faint hum rising through the floor. It sounded like the ice itself was practicing how to speak. February 3rd, 1983, the day they reached the lake. The drill had been chewing through the ice for months, inch by inch, down to a depth where sunlight had never touched. That morning the readouts began to spike. Pressure, vibration, then a sudden drop. George Hayes stared at the monitor and grinned for the first time in weeks. "We've hit the void," he said. "We're through." The entire station felt the tremor as the bit broke into open water 2 miles below. Steam rose through the borehole, warm and faintly metallic, fogging the frosted ceiling of the drilling module. For a moment, everyone forgot the fear. They had done it. Touched the ancient lake sealed beneath Earth's oldest ice. Pierce arrived, face windburned, eyes wide. "Shut down rotation," he ordered. "Keep the pressure stable." When they opened the sampling valve, a hiss filled the air. A thin plume of vapor curled upward, not white, but faintly blue, shimmering as if charged. The temperature around the shaft rose 5 degrees. The air smelled like wet iron and ozone. George laughed, clapping Nora on the shoulder. "You're looking at the first breath of a world that hasn't seen daylight in a million years." But Nora didn't laugh. She was watching the vapor drift across the floor, noticing how it bent around her boots instead of scattering. As it passed the lab doorway, the monitoring equipment began to beep. Magnetic flux sensors, radiation counters, all flickering in erratic unison. "Pierce," she called. "You need to see this." He stepped beside her, scanning the readings. A weak electromagnetic field was rising from the depths of the borehole, fluctuating in steady intervals, almost rhythmic. "That's not geological," Nora said. Pierce didn't reply. His eyes stayed on the graph as it pulsed again, heartbeat slow, deliberate. "Could be induction from the drill," George offered. "Or it's something alive," Nora whispered. The words hung in the warm mist. Jack burst in from the radio room, holding a headset. "We've lost the satellite uplink," he said. "All channels dead. It's not a storm, just gone." Pierce nodded, forcing calm. "Record everything manually. No one touches the shaft until pressure stabilizes." The order did little to steady the air. The vapor thickened, spreading along the corridor like fog. In the biology lab, Nora noticed movement in one of the sealed samples from last week's drill. The ice inside wasn't solid anymore. It pulsed faintly, like something breathing beneath the surface. She leaned closer, heartbeat quickening. "Pierce," she called again, softer this time. "You should come here." He joined her at the microscope. Inside the core, the faint blue light rose and fell, expanding in slow rhythm. Pierce exhaled, his breath visible in the warm air. "If there's life down there," he said quietly, "it's older than our fear." Outside, the wind howled across the ice shelf, drowning every other sound. But deep below the station, through 2 miles of darkness and frozen time, something new began to move. Isolation had its own sound, a slow, hollow hum that crawled under the skin after too many sleepless nights. By the 5th week of total darkness, that sound was everywhere inside Lake Argus. Technician Peter Hall was the first to break. He hadn't slept in 2 days, muttering that something was watching from outside. Pierce sent him to rest, but at dawn Peter burst into the mess hall, face pale, eyes wide. "There were eyes," he said, "under the window, in the ice." George laughed nervously. "You're seeing reflections." Peter slammed his hand on the table. "Reflections don't blink." The room fell silent. Wind pressed against the walls, making the metal moan. No one spoke again until Pierce ordered him sedated and confined to quarters. But the seed of fear had already taken root. That evening, the lights began to flicker. Not random bursts, but pulses that matched the rhythm of their voices. When Nora said stop, the ceiling lamps dimmed, then returned. When she whispered again, they blinked once, obediently. "It's reacting," she murmured. Pierce frowned. "Circuits are glitching, that's all." But it wasn't all. In the lab, the blue samples had changed again. The once static bubbles now swirled in slow spirals, forming networks that mimicked neural maps. Under the microscope, Nora traced the glowing lines with her finger. "Look at this," she said to George. "The patterns, they're identical to human EEG signals." He stared at the screen. "Are you saying it's copying us?" "I'm saying it's learning us," she replied. By midnight, the signal returned, only no one was at the radio. The sound didn't come through speakers or wires. It came from the air itself. A low, rhythmic thrum filled every corridor, vibrating in the lungs. Jack stood in the radio room, headset unplugged, yet he still heard it. 3 short, 2 long pause. The same call, only now it carried undertones, like whispers threading through the metal. Pierce gathered the team in the central hall. The power flickered again, throwing shadows that seemed to breathe along the walls. "We hold position," he said firmly. "No panic, no speculation." But as he spoke, Nora's gaze drifted past him. On the far wall of the lab, frost was forming, blooming outward in delicate shapes. Perfect spirals, repeating across the surface like a signature. George stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "It's writing," he whispered. The lights dimmed to half strength, then pulsed twice, slow, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat answering from within the walls. Pierce turned to Jack. "Is it the power grid?" Jack shook his head, whispering, "No, it's listening." The storm hit without warning. For 3 days the wind screamed across the plateau, flaying the station with shards of ice. Snow buried the outer modules to the roofline, and the only light came from the emergency bulbs that flickered in sickly yellow. The team moved like ghosts through the corridors. No laughter, no arguments, just the constant hum of the wind and the rhythmic creak of the frozen metal. Sleep came in fragments. Fear never left. On the second night, Mason Cole vanished. He'd gone out to clear the ventilation ducts between the main hall and the drill tower, a routine walk no more than 50 meters. Pierce gave him 5 minutes. 10 passed, then 20. The radio stayed silent. George and Jack went after him, roped together against the storm. Visibility was less than 3 feet. The world a blur of white noise and whipping snow. When they reached the tower, they found his flashlight lying on the ice, still on. No Mason. Near the base of the structure, the snow was disturbed. Not by footprints, by patterns. Spirals pressed into the surface, smooth and wide, as if something heavy had crawled just beneath. George knelt and brushed at the markings. The snow beneath was strangely warm. They followed the spirals for several yards until they simply stopped, vanishing into untouched snow. No hole, no body, no sign of where Mason went. They turned back, fighting the wind. Halfway to the hatch, Jack felt a vibration under his boots. Faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Back inside, Pierce sealed the doors and ordered a full lockdown. The generator's power fluctuated, lights dimming and rising like the pulse of a dying animal. "We're switching to backup," he said. For the first time, the station fell quiet. No fans, no hum of the main turbine, just the hollow rasp of the storm outside. Emergency power gave them light in 2 rooms, enough to keep instruments barely alive. In that silence, every sound felt amplified. A drip, a groan in the steel, the muffled thump of something shifting deep beneath their feet. Nora sat alone in the biology lab, her notes trembling under her hands. The ice samples were glowing steadily now, threads inside them twisting like veins. She opened her journal and wrote a single line before closing it again. "They move when we sleep. At dawn, if dawn even existed here." Pierce led George and Jack to the generator housing. The air inside was humid, strangely warm, condensation running down the walls. The main control board was dark, edges coated in frost. When George touched the panel, a low vibration spread through the floor. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant gugh that started somewhere below and rolled through the entire structure. It wasn't like thunder. It was lower, slower, almost organic. The floor plates rattled. Tools fell from the shelves. Pierce grabbed the radio. "Control room, report." Static. Then a faint whisper, too quiet to make out. Nora's voice finally broke through. "The borehole is bleeding." They ran to the drilling module. Steam fogged the windows from the inside. The pressure valve hissed, trembling violently. When George pried open the access hatch, a wave of warm air rolled out, wet and metallic. Inside the shaft, water was rising, not seeping from above, but pushing up from below, forcing its way through the drill tubing. It shimmered faintly blue in the lamplight. Jack stared into the shaft. "It's coming back at us." Pierce's jaw tightened. "Seal it. Now." They worked fast, bolting the manual valve, wrapping the couplings with emergency sealant. The vibration didn't stop. It pulsed through the floor, through the walls, through their bones. A rhythm that almost matched a heartbeat. George shut off the valve and backed away, panting. Pressure's holding, but the sound beneath them grew louder. The ice moaned, deep and slow, like something turning in its sleep. Then the power flickered once more, and every bulb in the corridor went out. In the sudden darkness, Jack thought he heard Mason's voice, soft, almost tender, whispering through the static of the dead intercom. "Don't close it. We're still here." He froze, waiting for Pierce to speak, but the only reply came from beneath the floor. a long, rolling tremor that shook the entire station. Somewhere under 2 miles of ice, the lake had stopped being still. And now it was rising. The next morning brought silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. The kind that means something is listening. Dr. Aaron Mills, the station medic, was checking everyone for frostbite when he noticed the change. George Hayes sat on the cot, shivering despite the heat lamps. His hands were pale, veins faintly glowing through the skin with a soft bluish tint. "George," Mills said carefully, "how long have you felt like this?" George rubbed at his forearm. "Since last night. It burns inside the veins. Like static." Mills rolled up his sleeve. Thin, luminous filaments crawled beneath the skin, winding in slow spirals, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. He drew blood. The sample shimmered faintly as he set it under the microscope. What he saw made him step back. The plasma wasn't just red. It was threaded with the same microstructures Nora had found in the ice, hexagonal chains that flexed and moved on their own. "They're alive," Mills whispered. Nora peered into the scope beside him. "Not alive, replicating." George's breathing quickened. "What does that mean?" Before she could answer, Jack's headset crackled. He hadn't touched the radio all morning. The main line was still disconnected from the generator, yet a signal hissed softly through the static. Pierce turned. "Where's it coming from?" Jack adjusted the frequency, face draining of color. "It's local, right here." He moved closer to George, and the signal grew stronger, clearer, a low harmonic hum that filled the air. The pattern was identical to the one from the lake. "It's broadcasting through him," Jack said. The lights flickered. Every metal surface in the lab began to vibrate in sync with the sound. The hum deepened, pressing into their skulls until speech became impossible. George clutched his head and screamed. His skin brightened with an inner glow, veins lighting like circuits. Mills grabbed a syringe, but George convulsed before he could act. The hum reached a pitch so high it shattered a beaker on the counter. Then silence. George collapsed, eyes open, skin cooling fast. The glow under his flesh faded to nothing. For the first time in hours, the station was still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Jack exhaled, voice shaking. "It stopped. The hum's gone." Nora pressed 2 fingers to George's neck. "He's dead." Pierce didn't speak. He only stared at the blood sample still glowing faintly under the microscope. "Seal the lab. No one touches anything." They burned the bedding, sealed George's body in a containment bag, and stored it in the coldest room they had. For several hours afterward, the air felt lighter, as if whatever had been beneath the ice was finally quiet. But just after midnight, the hum returned. It was stronger this time, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through their teeth. The instruments flickered to life, recording readings from nowhere. Jack clutched the logbook as it shook in his hands. "It wasn't the lake," he said. "It was him." Outside, the snow began to move. Not falling, but shifting, as if something beneath it had started to breathe again. By the next day, no one pretended it was just science anymore. Every wall seemed to pulse with the same faint rhythm as the signals. The hum had become part of the air, a low heartbeat that wouldn't stop. Nora spent hours in the lab, staring at the samples under the microscope. The luminous threads inside the melted ice now formed complex, branching webs. They connected and disconnected like firing neurons. Each pulse of light corresponded exactly to the signal pattern Jack had been logging for weeks. "It's not a message," she whispered. "It's a mind." Pierce looked up from the console. "A mind. Those signals, they're not calling for help. They're transferring. The frequencies encoding memory patterns, consciousness fragments. It's trying to map itself into us." Jack rubbed his temples. So George didn't get infected. He got downloaded? Nora nodded slowly. Lake Argus isn't a body of water. It's a network, a neural lattice made of living ice. It's been waiting under there, dormant, dreaming, until we open the door. Pierce's jaw tightened. Then we close it. We burn the samples, seal the borehole, and get out. It's too late for that, Nora said. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. The structures are inside our bloodstream now. I checked my own cells this morning. Pierce froze. You what? They're there. Smaller than viruses, but identical to what we found in George. She gave a hollow laugh. We're already part of it. Jack stepped back, as if distance could help. How long until? I don't know, she said. Maybe it's already finished. The intercom clicked on by itself. Static filled the room, followed by a distorted murmur. It was faint, like a recording played underwater. Then a voice, Pierce's voice, whispered through the speaker. Don't fight it. Everyone stared at him. Pierce shook his head, terrified. That wasn't me. The hum under their feet swelled. Instruments blinked alive even though the power grid was still disconnected. On the lab monitors, the electromagnetic readings drew new patterns, spirals of perfect symmetry, repeating endlessly. Nora whispered, It's learning faster now. Shut it down. Pierce shouted. Jack slammed the controls, cutting the feed, but the hum only grew louder. At 2:17 a.m., the temperature rose sharply. Frost melted from the walls and refroze in seconds, shaping itself into translucent ridges that looked disturbingly like veins. The radio crackled, and every speaker in the station came alive at once. They all heard it then, the sound that didn't belong to any machine or storm. Their own voices, echoing from the borehole. Jack's laughter, distorted and slow. Nora's whisper, repeating fragments of her notes. Pierce's command from hours earlier, seal the lab. Each phrase twisted, overlapped, merged into one. Nora covered her ears. It's not repeating us, she cried. It's becoming us. Pierce stood frozen, staring at the floor. The sound from the depths deepened into a single resonant tone, like a breath drawn in after a very long sleep. Then, from somewhere far below, their collective voices spoke in unison, calm, patient, and utterly human. We are awake. Night fell without warning, though no one could tell where night began or ended anymore. The storm outside had gone silent, but the ground beneath Lake Argus was alive, trembling in long, deep pulses that made every bolt in the structure hum. The lights failed first. One by one, the corridors drowned in darkness until only the blue glow from the ice samples lit the lab. The glow spread, crawling along the floor like liquid veins, pulsing with the same steady rhythm as a heart that wasn't theirs. Jack stumbled through the control room with a flashlight, beam cutting through clouds of vapor. Power's gone. Back up too, he shouted, though his voice sounded distant, muffled by the constant vibration. Pierce was at the window, staring at the horizon. Beyond the buried ridges of snow, the ice itself was cracking, vast, jagged fissures glowing from beneath with flashes of cold lightning, like a storm trapped under the world. It's moving, he whispered. Nora appeared beside him, eyes wide, face pale in the glow. It's not the lake, she said softly. It's the mind. It's expanding. The ceiling groaned, showering frost. Instruments on the console twitched and sparked, printing unreadable symbols that looked almost like writing. The temperature climbed again, condensation dripping from the vents. In the lab, the remaining samples shattered, releasing clouds of vapor that floated upward and formed shapes, faint silhouettes that flickered like memories caught in smoke. For a moment, Jack thought he saw George's face in the mist, mouth moving as if trying to speak. Then the floor shook. Hard. The entire station seemed to rise an inch and settle again. Somewhere below, metal screamed, the borehole walls collapsing inward. The sound came not as an explosion but as a long, resonant sigh. Mills, the medic, ran for the main door, shouting that they had to evacuate. He never made it. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the floor lit beneath him, a blinding white flare that swallowed his shadow. When it faded, he was gone. No body, no sound, just the faint shimmer of light sinking through the metal grating. Pierce backed away, trembling. "Where is he?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Inside it. The air vibrated with energy now, a chorus of tones overlapping, rising and falling like breath. The walls flexed. The ice outside the windows cracked in spirals, each fracture glowing from within. Jack grabbed the recorder, pressing the record button even as the table shook. "This is Marlowe," he said, voice quivering. "Argus facility, February 4th. We thought we drilled through ice, but maybe we drilled through memory." The lights flickered once more, then failed completely. Nora turned toward him, her outline lit from below by the glow rising through the floor. "Jack," she said, voice breaking. "Do you hear it?" He nodded. It wasn't the hum anymore. It was whispering. Their own voices again, hundreds of them, layered, echoing from the deep. One by one, the others vanished. No screams, no movement, just a burst of pale light and then absence, as if the ground had simply absorbed them. Jack clutched the recorder to his chest. The vibration reached a peak. Every molecule of air seemed alive. He felt warmth under his feet, spreading upward, and for the first time in weeks he wasn't cold. He looked toward the borehole as the floor split open, a narrow seam of white radiance widening slowly. From far below came a sound like breathing, vast, patient, eternal. The recorder clicked off. Lake Argus swallowed the last of its voices, and the ice above began to close again. A week later, the rescue team arrived. They came from McMurdo aboard a twin-engine transport, crossing a continent of silence. The blizzard had cleared, leaving behind a desert of white and wind-polished ice. From the air, Lake Argus Station looked like a wound, a field of broken metal and collapsed tunnels half buried under snow. Commander Reeves was the first to step out. The cold bit instantly through his mask, but it wasn't the temperature that made him shiver. The air itself felt heavy, like the aftermath of thunder, alive with static. "Thermal reading?" he asked. "Negative," his lieutenant replied. "No signs of life." They moved through the wreckage in silence. Corridors twisted under their boots, walls warped by pressure from within. Every surface glittered under a fine layer of crystalline frost, glassy, sharp, and strangely luminous. When touched, it didn't melt. It hummed softly, like something still carrying a charge. In what had once been the control room, the consoles were intact but dead. The paper recorders had fused together, coated in a thin sheet of ice. Reeves brushed the surface and saw faint blue patterns spiraling across the frost, repeating, symmetrical, almost like writing. "Sir," one of the men called from the far corner. "You need to see this." They gathered around the main radio console. The power lights were dark, but the speaker emitted a faint pulse, soft, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't static. It was a beat, low and organic, like the echo of a heart buried under the ice. Reeves turned the dial. The pulse grew louder, filling the dead room. Then, beneath it, a whisper, too faint to decipher but undeniably human. "Record that," he ordered. They moved next to the lab. The microscopes shattered, the sample trays empty. The walls were laced with frost that formed delicate spirals, identical to the ones in the core samples. On the central table lay a single object, untouched by the collapse. A notebook, the cover stiff with ice. Reeves brushed it clean. Across the front was a name stamped in fading ink. Jack Marlowe. He opened it carefully. Most pages were smeared. Ink bled into the paper, words unreadable. But the last page was different, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. Only one sentence glowed faintly when the flashlight passed over it, the ink reacting to the beam as if alive. "We are part of the signal now." No one spoke. Outside, the wind had died completely. The world was silent except for that single pulse still echoing through the radio. Slow, patient, unending. Reeves closed the notebook and looked toward the shattered borehole at the far end of the station. It was sealed now, frozen solid, but faint blue light shimmered far below the ice, like the glow of something that was still awake. He turned to his team. "Collect the log. Leave the rest." When they lifted off an hour later, Lake Argus lay quiet beneath them, a perfect white scar on the frozen plain. From the cockpit, the pilot swore he saw a flash under the surface, like lightning caught in a mirror. No one mentioned it in the report. The file was stamped classified, and the recording from the radio was archived under unidentified subglacial phenomena. But the pulse never stopped. Even through the interference, it could still be heard, faint, rhythmic, human. And as the final words of the debrief stated, spoken in the calm voice of the narrator who closed every lost expedition file, Lake Argus remains sealed to this day.